I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you and faith and truth.
2:17 in the morning. Palace security received orders directly from Prince William that shocked even the most experienced protection officers. Camilla Parker Bowles was to be removed from Clarence House immediately, escorted to a secure location, and barred from all royal properties pending emergency investigation. The evidence William discovered 3 hours ago doesn't just end her time as Queen Consort. It could destroy the monarchy itself. The encrypted files. December 10th, 2024. 11:34 in the evening. Marcus Chen, senior IT security specialist for the royal household's digital infrastructure, was conducting routine maintenance on the palace's secure email servers when he noticed an anomaly that shouldn't have existed. There was an encrypted partition on the server that wasn't part of any official system, hidden behind layers of security that suggested someone with high-level access had deliberately created a secret communication channel. Chen's first assumption was a security breach by external hackers, but as he began analyzing the partition's creation date, access logs, and usage patterns, he realized the account had been created from within Clarence House, using administrative credentials that belonged to someone in the Queen Consort's office. And the encryption protocols, while sophisticated, had a vulnerability that allowed Chen to decrypt portions of the communications and see who was sending and receiving messages. What he found made him immediately contact the head of royal protection, who in turn woke Prince William at Adelaide Cottage at 11:47. Chen had discovered thousands of messages sent over 18 months from an email account registered to a dummy corporation in the Cayman Islands, but routed through royal servers to avoid detection by standard security monitoring. The account belonged to Camilla Parker Bowles, and the recipients of her messages included individuals and entities that had no legitimate reason to be in contact with the Queen Consort. William had arrived at Buckingham Palace's secure IT facility by 12:20, where Chen walked him through what he discovered. The messages were methodically organized into folders with labels that immediately alarmed William: medical coordination, financial transfers, timeline management, insurance policies. Each folder contained communications that suggested Camilla had been conducting operations parallel to her official duties, operations that appeared designed to position her family for financial gain while simultaneously undermining aspects of Charles's reign. The medical coordination folder contained the most immediately disturbing material: messages between Camilla and individuals identified as medical consultants, but whose credentials William couldn't immediately verify, discussing King Charles's cancer treatment timeline. The messages suggested Camilla had been receiving updates about Charles's health that even William wasn't privy to, and that she'd been coordinating with these consultants about treatment schedules and medication protocols. One message from July of 2024 was particularly chilling. Camilla had written to someone identified only as Dr. M. Confirmed that treatment cycle 3 will cause maximum fatigue mid-August. This gives us the window we discussed. Ensure documentation is ready for signature during this period. He'll be too exhausted to review carefully. The message suggested Camilla was timing some kind of documentation or authorization to coincide with periods when Charles would be most impaired by his cancer treatment. The financial transfers folder revealed complex transactions, moving money from accounts associated with royal household operations into offshore structures that appeared to benefit Parker Bowles' family members. The amounts were substantial, millions of pounds over 18 months, disguised as legitimate expenses or charitable donations but actually ending up in family trusts. Each transaction had been carefully timed and structured to avoid triggering automatic fraud detection systems. The timeline management folder contained what appeared to be a master plan, a month-by-month schedule from May of 2023 through December of 2024, outlining specific objectives Camilla was working toward. The objectives included things like secure property transfers by Q3, finalize medical proxy arrangements, and most ominously, execute contingency protocol if primary timeline fails. William had spent 90 minutes reviewing the encrypted files with Chen, with the head of royal protection, and with Dame Margaret Blackwell, the constitutional law expert who was summoned urgently to provide legal guidance. Dame Margaret's assessment had been stark. Your Royal Highness, this evidence suggests criminal conspiracy, potential fraud, and possibly endangerment of the king's person. You have not only the right, but the obligation to act immediately to protect your father and the crown, even if that means acting without his knowledge or consent. At 2:13, William had made the decision. Camilla would be removed from Clarence House immediately, before she could destroy evidence or flee. She would be taken to a secure location where she could be questioned without access to communications or support from her family. And King Charles would not be informed until after the extraction was complete, because William couldn't risk Charles instinctively protecting his wife before understanding the full extent of what she'd done. The medical conspiracy. The deeper William and the investigative team dug into the medical coordination folder, the more disturbing the pattern became. Camilla had been in regular contact with at least 3 individuals presenting themselves as medical consultants or specialists in oncology, but when palace security checked their credentials, anomalies emerged. One was a licensed physician but had been censured years earlier for ethical violations involving experimental treatments. Another had degrees from institutions that couldn't be properly verified. The third wasn't a doctor at all, but rather someone with a background in pharmaceutical sales and insurance fraud. The communications revealed that Camilla had been receiving detailed information about Charles's cancer treatment protocol. Information that should have been confidential between Charles and his actual medical team at the hospital. Someone within Charles's legitimate medical circle had apparently been providing updates to Camilla beyond what Charles was sharing with her directly. And Camilla had then been discussing this information with her outside consultants in ways that suggested she was trying to understand when Charles would be most physically and mentally vulnerable. One email chain from August was particularly damning. Camilla had written, "Treatment cycle creates a window of approximately 5 to 7 days where cognitive function is measurably impaired. Need confirmation from you that documentation prepared under these circumstances would stand up to legal challenge if questioned later. Charles trusts me to handle estate matters while he's focused on recovery, so signatures during this window are feasible but must ensure they're legally binding." The response from Dr. M had been chillingly clinical. Provided the signatory understands generally what they're signing, even if too fatigued to review details carefully, documents are legally valid unless incapacity is proven. Your window exists between days 4 and 6 of cycle when he'll be exhausted but not incapacitated. Timing is critical. Too early and he'll have energy to review. Too late and he'll be recovering clarity. William had immediately ordered a review of every document Charles had signed during his treatment cycles, particularly during the periods Camilla's emails identified as optimal windows. What they found was a series of property transfers, trust modifications, and financial authorizations that Charles had signed during exactly the timeframes Camilla had identified. The documents transferred several properties into joint ownership structures that gave Camilla rights she hadn't previously held. They modified trust arrangements to include Parker Bowles' family members as beneficiaries, and they authorized financial transactions that moved royal household funds into accounts Camilla controlled. The most disturbing element was evidence that Camilla had been deliberately interfering with Charles's treatment schedule. Messages between Camilla and one of her medical consultants discussed adjusting appointment times to ensure Charles was meeting with advisors and signing documents during his most fatigued periods. There were also discussions about certain medications that could be suggested to Charles's doctors that would enhance fatigue without being medically inappropriate, essentially using legitimate treatment side effects to create windows of vulnerability that Camilla could exploit. Dame Margaret's legal analysis had been unequivocal. If these communications are authentic, and if documents were indeed obtained during deliberately induced periods of diminished capacity, we're looking at potential charges of fraud, undue influence, and potentially conspiracy to harm. Even if no actual physical harm was intended, using someone's medical condition to manipulate them into signing documents that benefit you is criminal behavior. The fact that the victim is the king and the perpetrator is his wife makes this a constitutional crisis of the highest magnitude. William had ordered immediate interviews with Charles's medical team to determine if any of them had been providing information to Camilla or coordinating with her consultants. One nurse, after being granted immunity from prosecution, had admitted that Camilla had repeatedly asked for updates about Charles's treatment schedule and had pressured the nurse to share information about when side effects would be most severe. The nurse had complied. not realizing the information was being used to time document signings rather than simply to help Camilla prepare to support her husband. But the most damaging testimony came from Charles's personal physician, Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, who had been keeping private notes about concerns she'd had but hadn't reported. Dr. Thornton revealed that Camilla had tried multiple times to influence treatment decisions, suggesting medications or protocols that Dr. Thornton had found medically questionable. When Dr. Thornton had refused these suggestions, Camilla had threatened to report her to medical authorities for providing inadequate care. Dr. Thornton had documented these interactions but had been afraid to bring them to Charles directly, fearing she'd be accused of trying to create conflict between Charles and his wife. The coronation fraud. The financial transfers folder contained evidence of systematic theft that had apparently been in progress since before Charles's coronation in May of 2023. The coronation itself, an event that had cost approximately £100 million and had involved months of planning and coordination, had provided Camilla with perfect cover for financial manipulation because of the complexity and scale of the budget. Forensic accountants summoned by William to review the encrypted files had identified at least £12 million that had been diverted from coronation-related accounts into offshore structures that ultimately benefited Parker Bowles' family members. The diversions had been accomplished through a sophisticated scheme involving inflated vendor contracts, fictitious service providers, and carefully timed transfers that exploited the chaos of coronation planning. One particularly brazen example involved catering services for coronation events. The official budget allocated £4.2 million for catering across multiple events, but the actual catering company that had been paid was a shell corporation registered in Jersey just weeks before the contracts were signed. The shell company had then subcontracted the actual catering work to legitimate providers for approximately £2.7 million, pocketing the £1.5 million difference. And corporate records for the shell company showed it was controlled by a trust that benefited Tom and Laura Parker Bowles. Similar patterns appeared across dozens of coronation-related contracts: security services, transportation, accommodation for visiting dignitaries, ceremonial equipment, publicity and media management. Nearly every major budget category showed evidence of inflated contracts with vendors that were either directly connected to Parker Bowles' family or that were shell entities designed to skim money that ultimately flowed to the family. What made the scheme particularly damaging from a constitutional perspective was that many of the fraudulent contracts had been authorized using Charles's signature on documents he'd been told were routine approvals but which actually committed royal funds to the fake vendors. The signatures themselves appeared to be genuine, which meant Camilla had somehow gotten Charles to sign documents authorizing these transfers without Charles understanding what he was actually approving. Dame Margaret had examined several of the signature documents and had made a devastating observation. These documents were clearly signed by His Majesty, but look at the dates. Each one corresponds to periods when he was undergoing treatment, and when Mrs. Parker Bowles' emails indicate he would be most fatigued and least likely to review carefully. She used his cancer treatment side effects to get him to sign documents authorizing fraudulent contracts that enriched her family. This isn't just fraud. This is exploitation of a vulnerable person for financial gain, and the vulnerable person is the king. The falsified signatures issue was even worse. Several documents in the financial transfers folder appeared to bear Charles's signature, but forensic analysis suggested they were sophisticated forgeries. These documents authorized transfers that Charles's actual signature would never have been placed on, suggesting that when Camilla couldn't manipulate Charles into signing during his vulnerable periods, she'd simply forged his signature on documents that transferred royal assets to her benefit. The forgeries opened potential criminal exposure that went beyond financial fraud. Forging the monarch's signature was potentially treason under British law, a crime carrying the severest penalties and constitutional implications that could trigger government intervention in royal affairs. If Camilla had indeed forged Charles's signature to authorize transfers of royal funds, she hadn't just committed fraud. She'd committed an act that could be construed as an attack on the crown itself. William had ordered forensic document experts to examine every signature purportedly from Charles on documents identified in Camilla's files. The preliminary results showed that at least 7 documents bore signatures that were likely forgeries, representing authorizations for transfers totaling approximately £18 million. Combined with the £12 million from inflated coronation contracts, the total theft was approaching £30 million, making it one of the largest royal financial scandals in British history. William's nuclear option. William had sat in the secure facility at Buckingham Palace reviewing evidence until 1:40 in the morning, accompanied by Catherine, who'd joined him at midnight after he'd called her to explain what was unfolding. Catherine's contribution to understanding the full scope of Camilla's conspiracy had been crucial, because she'd connected elements that William had been seeing as separate issues, rather than as parts of a coordinated plan. Catherine had pointed out that the timeline management folder wasn't just a schedule of objectives. It was a roadmap for systematically gaining control of royal assets and positioning the Parker Bowles family to benefit regardless of what happened to Charles. If Charles recovered fully from his cancer and reigned for another 20 years, Camilla would have secured properties and financial resources that would set up her descendants for generations. If Charles's health declined and he became incapacitated, Camilla would have legal control through the documents she'd manipulated him into signing during his vulnerable periods. And if Charles died, Camilla would have already extracted maximum benefit before William could institute any controls. "She's planned for every scenario," Catherine had said, her voice cold with a fury William rarely heard from his usually diplomatic wife. "She doesn't care whether your father lives or dies. She's just making sure her family benefits either way. And she's been using his cancer, his trust in her, his fatigue from treatment as tools to rob him and position herself. This isn't just theft, William. This is something worse. This is someone actively hoping your father stays sick because it makes him easier to manipulate." That perspective had crystallized William's decision. This wasn't a situation that could be handled through normal channels, through discussions with Charles or palace officials, or even through reporting to authorities. Camilla had to be removed immediately before she could destroy evidence or activate contingency plans that might be even more damaging than what had already been discovered. And the removal had to happen without Charles's knowledge, because Charles's instinctive loyalty to his wife would lead him to warn her or to give her opportunities to escape or to prepare defenses. William had consulted with Dame Margaret about the legal authority to act without the king's explicit approval. Dame Margaret's analysis had invoked rarely used provisions of royal succession law and constitutional practice. As heir to the throne and as counselor of state, William had not just the right but the duty to protect the monarchy and the sovereign's person if the sovereign was unable or unwilling to protect themselves. Given evidence that Charles's wife was actively exploiting his illness and potentially endangering his health for financial gain, William's action to remove her from access to Charles was legally defensible as protective intervention. "You're essentially invoking an emergency regency protocol without formally declaring regency," Dame Margaret had explained. "You're acting to protect your father when he can't protect himself because his judgment regarding his wife has been compromised by emotion and by her manipulation. This will be controversial. It will cause enormous family trauma. But legally and constitutionally, you have the authority to act, and arguably the obligation." The decision to move at 2:17 in the morning had been strategic. Camilla would be asleep, less able to react quickly or to destroy evidence. Charles would also be asleep, preventing him from interfering until after Camilla was secured. And the early morning timing meant there would be several hours before news would leak, giving investigators time to secure evidence from Clarence House before media descended. William had given the orders personally to the head of royal protection. "Mrs. Parker Bowles is to be removed from Clarence House immediately and transported to a secure location for questioning. She is to have no access to phones, computers, or any communications until formally interviewed. Her personal quarters at Clarence House are to be sealed and searched for evidence, and His Majesty is not to be informed until after the removal is complete. I'm taking full responsibility for this decision and its consequences." The midnight extraction. The team that entered Clarence House at 2:27 consisted of 6 armed protection officers led by Commander Sarah Blackwell, head of close protection for senior royals. They'd been briefed that they were executing an emergency protection operation authorized by the Prince of Wales, that the target was the Queen Consort, and that the operation was being conducted at the highest level of security classification. Commander Blackwell and 2 officers had gone directly to Camilla's private bedroom, while the other 3 secured exits and communications within the residence. Camilla and Charles maintained separate bedrooms at Clarence House, an arrangement that was publicly attributed to Charles's snoring and different sleep schedules, but which now appeared more calculated on Camilla's part, giving her privacy for activities Charles wouldn't observe. Camilla had been asleep when the officers entered her room at 2:29. Commander Blackwell had woken her with a flashlight and a firm voice. "Mrs. Parker Bowles, I'm Commander Blackwell of Royal Protection. You need to come with us immediately. This is a security matter and is not subject to discussion." Camilla's first reaction had been confusion and anger. "Where is Charles? What's happening? I'm not going anywhere until someone explains what this is about." But when she'd reached for her phone on the bedside table, one of the officers had stepped forward and confiscated it, explaining that she was barred from communications pending investigation. That's when Camilla's expression had changed from angry confusion to something approaching panic. "Investigation of what? I haven't done anything. You can't just come in here and take me somewhere. I'm the Queen Consort. Charles won't allow this." But even as she'd protested, Camilla had been getting dressed quickly, and Commander Blackwell had noticed her eyes darting toward a small safe built into the wall of her bedroom closet. The safe hadn't been on the building plans for Clarence House, which meant Camilla had installed it privately, likely to keep contents hidden even from household staff. "The safe needs to be opened," Commander Blackwell had said firmly. "Either you provide the combination or we'll have it forced open. Those are your options." Camilla had refused initially, claiming the safe contained only personal jewelry and documents that had nothing to do with any investigation. But when Commander Blackwell had radioed for equipment to force the safe and had made clear that refusal to cooperate would be documented in her official report, Camilla had capitulated, providing the combination while insisting that whatever they found was private property and couldn't be used against her. What they'd found in the safe had immediately justified William's decision to act. There were multiple USB drives containing what appeared to be backup copies of communications Camilla thought she'd deleted. There were handwritten notes outlining financial transactions and timelines that corroborated the encrypted emails. There was a ledger documenting payments to the medical consultants Camilla had been coordinating with. And most damningly, there were multiple documents bearing what appeared to be Charles's signature, but which comparison would likely show were forgeries, documents that hadn't yet been used, but which appeared to be prepared for future fraudulent authorization. There was also a handwritten letter dated just 3 weeks earlier, addressed to Tom and Laura Parker Bowles. The letter was extraordinary in its cold calculation. "If the current timeline holds, we'll have secured sufficient assets by Q1 of next year to ensure family independence regardless of how Charles's health progresses. The trust modifications are nearly complete, and the property transfers are executing on schedule. William remains oblivious, which buys us the time needed to complete Phase 3. Once that's done, even if they discover what we've accomplished, it will be too late to reverse most of the benefits. Your mother has always protected this family, and this is the culmination of that protection." Commander Blackwell had sealed everything from the safe as evidence, and had escorted Camilla from Clarence House at 3:02, using a service entrance to avoid household staff who might alert Charles or leak to media. Camilla had been transported to a secure facility operated by the Metropolitan Police's Royalty Protection Unit, a location that could hold her safely while preventing any communication with her family or lawyers until formal questioning began. Back at Clarence House, the search team had found additional evidence throughout Camilla's private quarters. Her personal computer contained more encrypted files. Her private office had filing cabinets filled with documents related to the financial schemes. And her bathroom had yielded bottles of medication prescribed to Charles that shouldn't have been in Camilla's possession, raising questions about whether she'd been controlling his access to prescribed treatments or possibly administering medications without his knowledge. The morning after, King Charles had been woken at 6:30 by his valet, with a message that Prince William urgently required his presence in the private study. Charles had dressed quickly, assuming some kind of emergency involving William's children or perhaps a security threat that required immediate royal attention. He'd arrived in the study at 6:47 to find William sitting behind the desk with Catherine beside him, both looking exhausted and grim. "Where's Camilla?" Charles had asked immediately, noticing his wife's absence and the unusual formality of William and Catherine waiting for him. William's response had been direct. "She's been removed from Clarence House and is being held at a secure location pending investigation into criminal activity." "Father, you need to sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult, but you need to hear all of it before you react." For the next 90 minutes, William had walked Charles through everything. The encrypted files, the medical conspiracy, the coronation fraud, the forged signatures, the contents of Camilla's safe. Charles's face had gone through shock, disbelief, denial, and finally a kind of devastated recognition as William presented document after document, email after email, showing the scope and calculation of what Camilla had been doing. Charles had tried multiple times to offer alternative explanations, to suggest misunderstandings or context that would make Camilla's actions less damning. But William had anticipated every deflection, had evidence for every excuse, and had built a case so comprehensive that even Charles's desire to defend his wife couldn't stand against the weight of proof. The moment that had broken through Charles's denial was when William played audio recovered from one of Camilla's encrypted files. A conversation Camilla had recorded with one of her medical consultants where she'd laughed about how easy it was to manipulate Charles during his treatment cycles. "He trusts me completely," Camilla's voice said on the recording. "Thinks I'm caring for him while he's vulnerable. Doesn't realize I'm using that vulnerability to secure what my family deserves. By the time he's recovered enough to review what he signed, it'll be too late to undo." Charles had sat in silence for nearly 5 minutes after the audio ended. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She was my last chance at happiness. I fought for decades to be with her. I lost Diana, destroyed my relationship with my sons, endured public hatred, all to finally marry the woman I loved. And you're telling me she's been robbing me, using my cancer to manipulate me, forging my signature to steal from the crown?" William had responded gently but firmly. "I'm telling you that the woman you loved either never existed or stopped existing years ago. What Camilla has been doing requires planning that dates back before your coronation, possibly before you even became king. This isn't opportunistic theft, Father. This is systematic exploitation that she's been working toward for years. And I had to act immediately because evidence suggests she was preparing for contingencies that might have included actively harming you if her timeline was threatened." The question now facing Charles was what to do with the evidence. William had already consulted with the Crown Prosecution Service through the Attorney General. The evidence was sufficient to charge Camilla with multiple crimes: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, potentially even attempted harm. But prosecuting the king's wife would create a scandal that would dominate headlines for years and would force Charles to testify against Camilla in criminal proceedings. The alternative was the solution Dame Margaret had outlined: force Camilla to sign a comprehensive settlement that required her to relinquish all claims to royal property, all titles, all financial support, and to accept permanent exile from Britain in exchange for not facing criminal prosecution. The settlement would include a gag order preventing her from discussing the royal family publicly, and it would require her to cooperate with recovering whatever assets could still be recovered from the offshore accounts and trusts. Charles's decision would determine whether this ended as a private royal disgrace handled internally or as a public criminal trial that would expose the monarchy's vulnerability to the world. William had made clear which option he advocated. "She committed crimes against you and against the crown. She should face justice. But I also understand if you can't bear to prosecute her publicly. Either way, she has to go, completely and permanently. And you have to accept that she married you for access to wealth and power, not out of love." The sun was rising over London as Charles sat in his study, surrounded by evidence of his wife's betrayal, facing choices that would shape the remainder of his reign. The monarchy would survive this, William had assured him. Removing Camilla and exposing her crimes would actually strengthen the crown by showing that not even the king's wife was above accountability. But Charles would carry the personal devastation of this betrayal for the rest of his life. Outside Clarence House, palace staff were beginning to notice Camilla's absence and the unusual presence of security throughout the building. By noon, news would start leaking that something extraordinary had happened overnight. And by evening, the official announcement would go out, though its exact wording would depend on the choice Charles made in the coming hours about whether his wife would face criminal justice or private exile. The extraction took 14 minutes. By 3:02 in the morning, Camilla Parker Bowles was removed from Clarence House, the safe that held her secrets was opened, and the evidence of systematic betrayal was secured. Prince William acted without his father's permission because the king couldn't protect himself from the woman who'd spent years exploiting his illness and stealing his legacy. Now Charles faces the choice between prosecuting his wife and watching her face justice, or exiling her forever with the knowledge that the great love of his life was the crown's greatest enemy. The monarchy survives by cutting out the rot, and the rot was sleeping in the king's house.